Hi guys, welcome to my first video on this channel. In today's video, I will be discussing the Disney Plus series WandaVision, specifically looking at the storytelling and structure of the show, as well as give my opinions on the fan theories that seem to have shaped viewers' expectations on how the show would proceed. The first thing I'd like to focus on is the sitcom structure of the show. The first 3 episodes of the show are the ones that are most immersed in the sitcom world, and what the show does is that it makes use of formal components like cinematography, mise-en-scène, and editing to really sell the idea that what you're watching is indeed a sitcom. Some of these elements include the aspect ratios, the image quality, black and white before transitioning into color, the costumes, themed intros, canned laughter, previously on, slide and flip transitions, and they even add in a commercial in nearly every episode to really sell the idea that what you're watching is a sitcom. Apart from these formal elements, the subplots of the first 3 episodes are also typical sitcom plots. There's the miscommunication about an anniversary or a dinner, trying to blend in and make it seem like they were normal, and these conflicts are usually resolved by the end of the episode, which makes that particular storyline episodic. But the overall storyline of the show is very much a serialized one. Characters remember and acknowledge events from previous episodes, and so there is that continuity within the overall show. But the only thing is that characters don't seem to acknowledge or recognize the decade and aesthetic changes from previous and current episodes. Because the show utilizes both formal and narrative elements of sitcoms, it's very easy to immerse the viewer in the sitcom world and expect things to go in a sitcom-y direction. But then the show uses these disruptions whose purpose is to shake the viewer out of that complacency. These disruptions were done through editing, cinematography, and sound. Editing is used as a disruption when there's a jump cut, or even when the screen almost appears to be glitching. Cinematography was used with the canted angles and framing of shots. And finally, sound was used as a disruption when there is an evident lack of sound, or even the use of a score that builds to match the tension on screen. These are essentially disruptions because sitcoms have a very distinct look and sound. Jump cuts are not common in sitcom editing, it's usually just done with a simple cut. The camera is almost never angled, even if it does move sometimes to follow the character's movement on screen. And with sound, the use of canned laughter is very prominent, and a tense score is never really heard in sitcoms because the stakes are not that high. And because the first 3 episodes took place in the sitcom world, it does pose many questions that are begging to be answered. By the end of episode 1, you're wondering, was this all in Wanda's head, and why is Sword watching? The end of episode 2 makes you wonder, who is calling Wanda? What was that for the children thing about? And is Wanda truly aware of what is going on or not? And by the time episode 3 comes around, you're probably wondering, are the residents aware of what is going on? Is it all Wanda's doing? And how did she create this world? Some of these questions would eventually be answered in episode 4, but the main questions regarding Wanda's awareness and how the sitcom world came to be won't be answered until later episodes. I personally think that keeping a third of the show restricted to the sitcom world does a wonderful job of maintaining this secretive and mysterious vibe. If the show had immediately started going back and forth between Westview and the real world and what Sword has been up to, the show wouldn't have been nearly as intriguing or as compelling. Episode 4 is also a pretty strong episode in my opinion. Its primary goal is to explain to the viewer the events that led to Monica Rambeau being in Westview, and it does a wonderful job of answering some of the questions that we've been asking since episode 1 while still leaving the main ones unanswered. So episode 4 is the sole episode in the series that takes place primarily outside of Westview. Then episode 5 marks the beginning where the show starts to jump back and forth between Westview and the real world. And I think it's really cool because you get to see the aspect ratios of the screen change depending on which set of characters are on screen. So when you're in Westview with Wanda, Vision, and the kids, you get to see this widescreen aspect ratio. But then when you're outside of Westview with the Sword People, Jimmy, Monica, and Darcy, you get the cinematic aspect ratio. Episode 5 is the turning point in the plot as Vision becomes more aware that not everything in Westview is as it seems. In one scene in the episode, he's at the office with Norm when he receives the email about the Maximoff anomaly. In his conversation with Norm, it enforces the idea that Wanda is in control.
You have to stop her.
Stop who?
She's in my head.
Norm doesn't really specify that it's Wanda, which led to some debate online that it could have been Agnes behind it, because everyone was convinced at that point that she was Agatha Harkness. But then the possibility that Agnes is in control was minimized by episode 6 after her conversation with Vision, where she confirms that Wanda is in control.
No one leaves. Wanda won't even let us think about it.
When asked by Pietro how she made Westview into the sitcom world, Wanda genuinely cannot remember how it all started. Her facial expression doesn't indicate that she's lying, so viewers can't help but wonder if maybe she wasn't really in control and that there was a greater power at play. Episode 7 is the last official sitcom episode as the show caught up to the 2000s to 2010s. I think it might be my favorite episode of the entire series because we get more insight from Wanda in her confessionals between scenes.
Look, we've all been there, right? Letting our fear and anger get the best of us, intentionally expanding the borders of the false world we created.
The Agatha reveal made it all the better because it was set up so perfectly with little clues and hints throughout each episode. And who can forget that song, It Was Agatha All Along? It was such a hit. I got it stuck in my head for like the rest of the day after I watched the episode. Episode 8 was one of my favorites because we finally get to delve into Wanda's backstory and it answers so many of the questions we've had from the beginning. Revealing her backstory and delving into the trauma she's experienced her whole life near the end of the show but not at the finale is the perfect place to finally understand Wanda as a character and to understand why she did the things she did in the show. Not only does the backstory journey explain why she chose sitcoms to reenact in Westview, but we get to understand just how her grief overwhelms her to the point that she chose to try and avoid dealing with it, hence why she created this world where she and Vision got married and had their own family. It was one of the saddest episodes and it truly does make you sympathize with Wanda, but at the same time it also answers that major question, how did she create the sitcom world? The end of episode 8 connects to the beginning of episode 9, which involves the use of the Scarlet Witch title. In the comics, Wanda is more commonly known as the Scarlet Witch, and the show did pay homage to her comic-accurate costume in the Halloween episode. But no one in the MCU has ever really called Wanda as the Scarlet Witch before the show, nor had she put on the costume before the show started. With the Avengers, their real names are just as well known as their superhero names. There's no secret identity, except for Spider-Man, but we all know how that turned out in Far From Home. But going back to Wanda and the Scarlet Witch, the finale was not just about her accepting the mantle as the Scarlet Witch and getting that totally cool updated costume. Seriously, I cannot get over how amazing Elizabeth Olsen looks with the headpiece and her hair is all wavy and the arm sleeves. Plus, this new costume is not as sexualized as the comic version. I could gush about this costume all day, except for maybe the cape.
No kicks!
I think that in order for her to have accepted the Scarlet Witch mantle, she needed to let go of her grief, as well as, letting go of this world that she created with her kids and Vision. She understands now, by the end, that this power that she wields is not to be used lightly, and she's very much interested in exploring it and learning how to control it. Now, I'll be discussing the fan theories and why they blew up. I'll be the first to admit that I was totally on board a lot of these theories when the first show started, and I think that the main reason why the discourse and fan theories blew up so much was because of the weekly episode drop. With most streaming services, they usually drop the season in a day so that you can binge it, talk about it, and discuss your theories for the next season right after you're done watching it. But with that, the hype only lasts for a few days. WandaVision had a weekly episode drop, and as mentioned before, it's very much shrouded in mystery and secrecy, especially with the first 3 episodes. So, the show intrigues its viewers and poses many questions, but withholds answering those questions in one go. And so by dropping the episodes on a weekly basis, the hype never quite ends until a few days after the finale. everyone on social media will be talking about theories, and it would spark discourse, share theories with each other, etc. I know that Disney probably did this because they want you to pay a subscription, and a trial session would last for only a week, but it was a pretty smart strategy in my opinion. It keeps the viewer wanting for more. When the trailer for WandaVision dropped, it didn't give away too much of the plot, but it did give the idea that the show was not set in the real world, since Vision was supposed to be dead post-Infinity War. And if there's one thing the MCU is known for, is continuity. So this idea of Wanda creating an alternate world isn't unfamiliar to comic readers. There was a storyline called House of M where Wanda rewrote reality after finding out that the twins she gave birth to weren't real. With Vision as the father, it was sort of impossible for the twins to have been conceived organically / naturally. So in the comics, Wanda used Mephisto's soul in order to give birth to the twins, and he ultimately reabsorbs them. So that's where the whole Mephisto theory came from, and why people thought that they were adapting the House of M storyline. Although, to be fair, MCU fans do love to analyze and pick out small details that actually made sense that Mephisto was behind everything. There was that mention of the devil is in the details line in episode 2, and there was also that shot of a fly in Agatha's house in episode 7. The fly thing was mentioned in a Marvel Wiki page that Mephisto appeared as a fly somewhere in the comics. So even though the showrunners weren't going down the Mephisto route, it's very easy to see why fans could come up with that theory that Mephisto was behind everything. These theories are fun to discuss, and they can make sense if you can provide details and proof from the show. But they also shape the viewer's expectations. Now, this is the first official Marvel TV show after the Netflix Marvel shows. Agent Carter and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were no longer considered part of the MCU canon, so there wasn't any definite expectations of what the shows would and wouldn't include. But knowing the MCU, there's always a big bad and plot-driven story, so that's why people thought Mephisto was behind everything. But now we can see that the Disney Plus shows focuses more on character development than plot development, so there's no need for a big bad. Antagonists and villains? Sure. But taking them down isn't the main focus of WandaVision. It's about watching this hero, in this case Wanda, come to terms with her grief and for her to finally take on the mantle of the Scarlet Witch. I will say that overall this was a very intriguing show in terms of its storytelling, pacing, and structure. The sitcom structure was not something I would ever expect from an MCU show, but it made it work, and there was also an in-character explanation as to why the sitcom structure was chosen in the first place. The storytelling was compelling in that it didn't reveal things too early or too late, and it kept you intrigued and wanting for more by posing questions and eventually answering most of them. The fan theories were fun to engage with, and while I'll admit it did shape my expectations for the finale, I was still very much happy with how the series ended. Not only did it promise us more Wanda as Scarlet Witch, but the show is connected to the upcoming Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness and the Marvels movie. Wanda was never really someone I paid too much attention to in the movies. I mean, we knew the basics about her backstory, with her parents passing away when she was young, that she lost Pietro in Age of Ultron, before ultimately losing Vision in Infinity War. But now that we've seen what she's gone through, it makes her a lot more sympathetic in my eyes. And I think that that's something that's important to feel about a character, especially someone whose morality was also brought into question many times throughout the show. And that's a wrap on my thoughts on WandaVision's storytelling structure and my opinions on the fan theories. Thank you guys so much for watching my video, and please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Tune in next week for my next video, which will be on the first episode of Loki. See you guys next week.